and welcome to Embracing Not Knowing, Teaching Science Confidently in the Elementary Classroom. My name's Regina, and I am going to be your guide today through increasing your confidence in teaching science. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up about what we're doing today, we are going to look at some of our preconceptions about teaching science. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my passion for teaching science. And then we're going to kind of get into the meat of it, talking about cultivating a science-friendly mindset, how to build science capacity in your classroom. I have a bunch of resources to share with you, and then my contact information. And there are a couple of places where I am going to ask you to stop the video and write down your thoughts or kind of do some brainstorming. So it might be helpful to you to have a paper and pencil nearby. Let's start with preconceptions. So again, like I said, take a moment, pause the video, and think about what comes to mind when you think about teaching science in your classroom. Positive, negative, neutral, whatever your thoughts and feelings are about teaching science in your classroom, write them down. All right, welcome back. How'd that go? If we were here together, there would be more to this conversation. We might share with our partners. Maybe some of us would share out. We'd have some discussions about it. My primary goal would be to help you understand that you're not alone in whatever feelings you have, however they range from positive to negative, and your concerns that you might have. You're not alone. So when I put myself in the shoes of an elementary school teacher and did this exercise, here are some of the things that I thought about. And honestly, I actually did this about social studies because I don't know that much about social studies, so it was a good way for me to think about it. So some of the things that I thought about were, when will I have the time? Because if there's one thing that teachers don't have enough of, it is always time. When am I going to have time to do this? And then the other thing I thought of was, there's such a push to worry about the literacy and math test scores. So how do I explain or defend myself if an administrator comes in and says, well, why are you doing X instead of Z? We need to do Z because our scores are low. So if you had anything around those thoughts and or whatever thoughts you had, I can 100% guarantee you that if we could have this conversation in person, that you're not alone. And I want you to know that. So here's a little bit about me. I have over 20 years of experience teaching, both formally and informally. I've taught students from K through 12 and tutored students in college. My favorite animal is an octopus, and if you don't figure that out by the end of the presentation, I love octopuses. I'm also an instructional coach. I love cats, and if somebody would pay me, I would be willing to go to college for the rest of my life. But what I really want to share with you is why I love science and how that love was fostered. Because it wasn't fostered in school. And I'm not saying that I had a bad experience in school, because I didn't. But it wasn't like this life-changing thing where, oh, I had this one teacher who yada, 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 right? I found love in science at home, in my personal life, not in my school life. Because I grew up on a farm, which is odd it was odd even when I was a child, but even more so now, I think. And I spend my days, especially during the summer, outside and learning about the different kinds of trees and where they grow and how you can tell them apart and how to plant plants and why you need to do things a certain way so that they grow well, and helping my dad take engines apart and doing all of these really hands-on things. I didn't even know that I was learning as much as I did until I was an adult. And as an adult teacher, reflecting back on my experiences, I started to wonder, well, what do we do for students that don't have that kind of support at home for science education? How do we build experiences for them so that even if it's not a love of science, which of course would be my preference, but even if it's not a love of science, if it's just not a afraid of science and an understanding of science, how do we get them there? And hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you will feel a little bit more confident about doing some science in your classroom. And that's my goal. Here's mindset. And before you do anything, regardless of what it is, I strongly encourage you to center your mindset and think about what your ultimate goals are, because that's going to guide you as you move forward. So some of these you might already have as your mindset, and some of these might be a shift. But I strongly encourage you thinking about them because they will help you incorporate science into your classroom. All right, and the first one you're going to hear me say over and over again today. Science isn't about knowing information. It's about figuring things out. It's about answering questions. It is not about collecting knowledge. It is not about collecting knowledge. And I repeat that because so often people say, oh, well, I don't really know a lot about science, or I'm not good at science. That's not the point of science. The point of science is to answer questions. Okay, science developed because people were curious about the natural world and wanted to figure out how it worked. And they had questions about how it worked. And through that, we've developed this process that we call science. Now, granted, if you look at that in the dictionary, that definition is going to be a little bit different. But in my own practice, I fully believe that science is a verb. It's a thing that we do, not just a thing that we collect. All right. Second, things are going to be messy, literally and metaphorically. Okay. When you give your students hands-on activities to do, there's always going to be somebody that makes a mess. It's just how it is. Okay, I teach in the high school and it's still that way. And so you have to be okay with it being a little messy. And also metaphorically, like science is not a straight line, and I think that is also another misconception, right? Like I'm at A, I need to get to B, and there's a straight line. But it's usually not that way. Usually it's like you take a loop-de-loop and you zoom back one way and then you zoom the other way and then you finally maybe get to B. And by the time you get to B, you've accumulated a whole bunch of other questions that you don't have the answers for. So I guess what I'm trying to say is be okay with it not being so rigid. I don't know how to get you there, but think about it. And along with that, making mistakes is okay. And that has to go again with the A directly to B, right? Sometimes you're walking your way down the path and you think you're going to get to B and you hit a brick wall. And like, oh, this path doesn't go any farther. I need to backtrack and go back around. Well, that's a mistake. But it's a different way of thinking about the mistake. And mistake happens all the time in science. Okay? And you can even look up, if you'd like, Google, how many discoveries were made by mistake? And there's a billion of them. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. It's okay for you to make mistakes. It's okay for your students to make mistakes. Science is not about perfection. It's kind of the opposite, in fact. And then the last thing to think about on this side of the screen is what kind of a mindset, what kind of learning mindset do you want your students to grow? Because the best way for them to grow that mindset is if you are there to model it for them. So if you can think about how you want your students to approach new things, then you can kind of double back and say, okay, well, what do I need to do in order to model it? And you might have to do the whole pretending until you've got it. But your students pay attention to the things that you do and the things that you say. And I realize I'm probably not telling you anything new here. But if every time you get to science, your mindset towards science is negative, the students are going to pick up on that. Okay? If your mindset is excited, the students are going to pick up on that. Okay? Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is to figure out what's going on right now in your classroom. Okay, because you can't get to B if you don't know that you're at A. Right? If you don't know where you are, you can't go anywhere else because you don't know where you are. So before you can start thinking about where you want to go, you need to figure out where you are first. And these questions that are on the right-hand side are meant to help you figure that out. So, are you currently putting regular time each day for science? And there's no approach these questions, there's no judgment. You're just figuring out where you are. There's nothing wrong with where you are, but you need to know where you are. Okay, so there's no judgment here, whether you do these things or not do these things. We're just trying to figure out where you are. How is learning happening? Okay, are you providing students time for discussion and hands-on activities and asking questions? Are you mostly doing direct instruction in some way? Is it not happening at all? Okay, whatever that is. And again, there's no judgment. We're just trying to figure out where we are. Okay? Are you incorporating skills into your learning? So, reading graphs, writing complete sentences, using descriptive words, right? Those are all skills. Are you actively trying to incorporate them into your science instruction? And lastly, are your students spending most of their time trying to figure something out and or making sense of something? Or are they spending time accumulating knowledge. Okay, and again, I do not mean this in a judgmental way. We just have to figure out where we are, so we can decide where we want to go. So this is another spot where I would encourage you to pause the video for a minute and think about some of these things, right? You might want to journal about mindset for a little bit. You might want to think about what your experiences were as a child or while you were in school, and what you would like your students' experiences to be. Okay, and then identify where you are. Okay, wherever you are is where you are, and it's okay. Hopefully, throughout the course of this presentation, we will help you figure out where you want to go. Okay, so pause the video now and think about these things a little bit before you move on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about providing time in your classroom. Because I feel like this is a huge problem. I've never talked to a teacher that says, I have too much time to do things. Never have I ever, okay? I've never talked to a teacher that said they had too much time. All teachers that I've ever talked to have said, I don't have enough time. So how do you add science in when you already don't have time to do the things, all the other things that you need to do? Okay, and this is the building capacity part of the presentation. How do you build space, capacity in your room for science instruction? So, here's the thing. If you do science once a week, I know personally I have trouble remembering what happened from one day to the next sometimes. There's not much continuity there. Like an entire week goes by the time the next week comes, your students have forgotten what they did the week before because there's no continuity. Now, I understand that it may not, as much as you try, it may not be feasible for you to put science instruction every single day. I think there should be science instruction every single day, but not a lot of people listen to me, unfortunately. So what can you do? There's a couple of different things. One thing you can do is you can set aside 5 minutes somewhere. Maybe it's during story time or during snack, or you've got a couple of minutes before the students are going to their specials, and give students opportunities to talk about what they did in science. Hey, do you guys remember what we did in science on Monday? Hey, turn to your partner, turn to the person sitting next to you and chat a little bit about what you guys did. And then maybe have a couple people share out. It at least keeps it in their mind. And it also gives them a chance to talk about it in their own words, right? Which is really important. Okay. Another strategy that you can use is science easily supports other skills that may be deemed more important by your administration, right? So if you have your students maybe watching a couple of different types of plant, and maybe they're, counting leaves once a week, or they're measuring the heights, or whatever it is that they're doing. And then you decide you want them to make a graph from their data. But, oh gosh, I don't have any more time for science in my week. But you certainly have time for math instruction. And making a graph and being able to explain what that graph says is definitely a math skill. So you can sneak it into your math time because they're doing a math skill. Okay, so that's one example. I could probably do a whole nother um, um, presentation on how to fit science into math and language arts. So I'm not going to like super go into it here, but it's something to really keep in mind because there's a lot of places where they overlap. All right. Some of this you probably already know. Oh yeah, students are supposed to do hands-on activities and they're supposed to talk to each other and we're supposed to activate prior knowledge. All of that stuff sounds familiar, I would assume. My suggestion to you that will help you do all of those things without having to think about them separately is to start doing something called phenomena-based learning or instruction. Okay? So the idea is that for a science concept, you find an observable phenomenon, something that the students can see. Whether it's through a demonstration or an activity that they do, or through a picture or a video, something that they can see and constantly refer back to. So I placed a couple of pictures here at the bottom, and we have the northern lights, we have clouds in the sky, and we have a tsunami. Okay? So the northern lights and the clouds could be atmosphere. The clouds could also be when you're talking about weather. All right, and the tsunami would be if you were in some like an earth science unit where you were talking about like tectonic plates and how they move, right? And what you're supposed to do with this phenomenon is use it as an anchor for all of your other lessons. Because that phenomenon should help your students ask questions. Why are the clouds white? Why do they look like they're fluffy? Why do clouds sometimes look like they're far away and sometimes they look like they're very close? Why sometimes are clouds gray? Why does fog happen? Right? Like those are all questions that perhaps could be generated from that picture of clouds. Okay? Same thing with tsunami. Like, you could even not tell them it's a tsunami. Like, hey, look at this. What does this look like? Well, that's a really big wave. I don't think I've ever seen a wave like that. What kind of wave is that? Or what would cause a big wave like that? Why is it happening? Where is it? Right? All of these questions, all of these inquiries. And then your instruction, however you choose to structure your lessons, are to help students answer those questions. Like what causes, like you could say, oh, well, I know what it's called. It's called a tsunami. And then the question could be, well, what causes a tsunami? Right? And then all of your instruction, right? You're going to, whatever it is, you're going to have something about tectonic plates, about the different kinds of how they move against each other and the different, how are earthquakes formed, right? These are all little mini questions. How does an earthquake happen? How does a volcano happen? And then what has to happen in order for a tsunami to happen? But everything is going back to that tsunami as this phenomenon. One of the things that I really like about using a phenomenon is that it puts the students on an equal ground. Because regardless of what their previous knowledge is, and we all know that our students have different amounts of previous knowledge, right? Some students may have a much higher level of previous knowledge than others. All of your students in the class can now use this phenomenon as a piece of previous knowledge to start building onto. Okay, so even your students that may not have experience with tectonic plates and tsunamis and things like that, and other natural disasters, they can still look at this picture and have something to build on. So in my opinion, this is a really useful piece that you can add into your teaching practice without a lot of extra work, right? It's pretty easy to add in, and it just automatically, just by existing, helps solve a bunch of things that you might be struggling with. Okay? Now, what might this look like? Well, I thought I would kind of take you through some ideas. And you might think of other things too. Feel free. So I grabbed some standards off the North Carolina website on ecosystems. I have a life science background, so it's generally easier for me to find those things. So that's what I did. And basically these standards are about plant structures, how they work, how do plants work, what do plants need in order to live. And there's one that says, summarize the life stages of seed plants. And that one is the one that made me think of the phenomenon, that made me choose sequoia. Because it's, even as an adult, it is hard to believe that this giant tree came from a tiny seed. But it did. Well, how? How does something go from this tiny seed, become this giant tree? How does that happen? It makes me curious. I want to know more. Right? And that's the other thing that the phenomenon does, that I should have mentioned earlier, is it helps provide interest. Because it helps provide that, oh, well, I kind of want to know that. Like, that's weird. I'm curious about it, right? It adds curiosity. Okay, so you could have a discussion about it. Like, do you think these plants came from a seed? What do you think a seed for these plants would look like? Do you think it would be big? Do you think it would be small? Right? You can have some discussions about the things that they see. And you could have multiple pictures, right? And have them make some observations. Okay? So, and I would say that maybe your question that you're going to use to run through your unit is going to be something like, how does a tree go from a tiny seed to a giant organism? Right? Okay, so what are some things that you can do with this? Well, if you have plants around your school, like if you have some trees, maybe a little garden, you can do a little field trip around your school and make observations. Okay, if you don't have that, or you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can also show them pictures, like either from an arboretum, I forgot what the one that's flowers is called, or even just that you get off of Google, right? Like just look up pictures of trees and have them make observations, right? What do they see that's similar? What do they see that's different? Like, what do all of these things have in common? What are some things they don't have in common? Right? This is building on their previous knowledge. Okay, another thing you can have students do is have them grow a plant from a seed. And I like to do this in a plastic baggie. You take a plastic baggie and a wet paper towel, and you put the seed in. And the seed will start to grow. And I've seen this done successfully with lima beans and sunflowers, although you probably could do it with peas also. And the really cool thing about this is that they get to see everything. Like, they're going to get to see the roots start to grow, and then the stem, and then the leaves. And they can really see all of those beginning stages from seed to plant. And there's other really great questions that go with this. Like, I was just thinking, it's always fun to ask them if they think the seed is alive. Most students can identify that a plant is alive, but what about a seed? Are seeds alive? And particularly when you get a little bit older kids, it's an interesting conversation to have. Right? There's all kinds of observations that they can make. They could count leaves. They could measure length. They can make descriptive observations about what it looks like. Right? All different kinds of collecting of data. Right? And you can even then have them plant them in a pot and have them grow and have them see, well, what happens to the plant over time? What is the, maybe it's like 2 weeks, whatever. And then, have them measure what the plant was like at the end of the 2 weeks and have them compare it to the size of a seed. That could be something that you do. And I'm just, giving some ideas. There's a bunch of billion different things you could do with this project. Okay. Once students kind of have an understanding of what a seed looks like as it grows, then you can start playing with what things does it need to grow. So you can start playing with different kinds of soil. You could start playing with different amounts of water. You could start playing with different amounts of sunlight. And here's a great place where you can allow for student choice. Because you can say, like, okay, you can either do light or water or soil. Give them some choices and let them choose. And now they're answering their own questions about how plants grow. What do plants need? Right? And there's other things that you can do with it. And the other great thing about this is after the setup, right, you maybe need like 10 minutes every other day, a couple other days to take measurements, right? It doesn't take a long time. And in between, you can have students maybe journal about what happened the day before, or have them have a discussion with a partner. Hey, what's your plant doing? Oh, well, my plant's doing this, and they can have a conversation. So it fits in really nicely. At least I think so. Okay, now, for any of you that are out there that are worried about, oh, well, my administrators are really concerned about our math and our literacy scores on those tests. I'm concerned about how I can defend doing all of this science. So here's how you do it. These are science and engineering practices that were published with the Next Gen Science Standards. Now, North Carolina did not adopt the Next Generation Science Standards, But these practices are really useful anyway, in a bunch of different ways. If you're looking at a topic and you're like, I don't know where to start with this, sometimes looking at the practices can help. Like, well, let's say it's like tectonic plates. All right, tectonic plates. Well, I don't know any investigations right now that they could do. Oh, but maybe they could make a model or look at a model. Like, they make maps of the tectonic plates. So maybe we could look at a map and see what the different plates are. Right? That's using models. So when you're trying to figure out activities, incorporating these practices can help you build an activity. The other thing is that these practices very clearly fall into either a literacy mindset or a mathematics mindset. And so they can be used as a reason for you to do the activity. Okay? So 2, 4, and 5 are very specifically math-oriented. Okay? Developing and using models, because that's really what math is it's a type of model. Maybe not at the elementary school level, but it's getting there, right? Analyzing and interpreting data. Well, that's math. Using mathematics and computational thinking, that's math, right? Those are clearly math. And then the rest of them fall in with literacy. Asking questions. Having them write down questions. Right? How do you write a question? How do you write a question that's clear? How do you decide what questions you have? At defining problems. How can you read like a paragraph and figure out what the problem is? Or in a story, what's the main conflict? They have to find the problem and tell you what the problem is. It's the same skill. Planning and carrying out investigations. Okay, if at any time you do where students have to write things in order like a recipe, that's planning and carrying out investigations. You do this first and this second and this third and this fourth. Constructing explanations and designing solutions. So being able to describe what's going on, right? Like a descriptive paragraph. Okay, engaging in argument from evidence. Well, if you ever have your students do anything resembling persuasion, right? Persuasions. I automatically think a persuasive essay, but I know that might not be the level that you're at, right? But any kind of trying to persuade someone to do something or to not do something, that's engaging in argument from evidence, right? Like, I think this because this, and therefore you shouldn't do or should do, right? That's argument from evidence. And truly, whatever kind of literacy you're doing, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So obtaining is the same as research, right? Like picking out main ideas, right? That could be obtaining information. Evaluating. Do you think that this source is a good information? That's evaluating. And communicating information, talking to their friends, creating a presentation, maybe in small groups, explaining what their group did. That's communicating information. So when you're concerned, if you're concerned, these are a great way to kind of clear that up. Oh, well, I'm working on communicating information. Okay? And like I said, I could probably spend an entire session on explaining how to do this. I'm just trying to give you some ideas. Okay, so my last bit of advice for you. Be willing to learn with your students. It's okay if you don't feel comfortable. Be okay with not being comfortable. Think about some of the things that you ask your students to do. Sometimes they're not comfortable either. And again, the best way to encourage them to do something they're not comfortable with is to model it for them. Okay? And along with that, you can express that teachers are always learning new things also. You're as much as you wish you could be, you are not a font of endless information. And you can model that. Like, they ask you a question about a tectonic plate. You know what? I don't know. Let's see what we can find out. Or, you know what? I know so-and-so down the hall is really into tectonic plates. When I see them, I'll ask them about it and I'll report back tomorrow. And doing that is perfectly fine as long as you follow up. But if you don't follow up, then it hurts your credibility, okay? Make sure that you follow up, because that shows that student that their question was a good question and it was worth answering and it was worth asking, right? If a student asks a question and you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to ask so-and-so about it, and then you never get back to them, what you've taught your student is that their question was not important. Okay? When you're not sure about stuff, there's tons of videos. YouTube is freaking awesome. And in the next slide, I have compiled some places that have very good science videos that are not super complicated and get straight to the point. So if you're like, ugh, tectonic plates, this always confuses me. Oh, wait, you know what? I can go review that really quick 4-minute video, right? They're not long either, and help remind me, right? Science isn't about having the answer. It's about trying to find the answer. It's about figuring it out. Okay, and something that I hear commonly is move from learning about to figuring out. So instead of learning about tectonic plates, hey, let's figure out how tectonic plates move. It's a mindset shift that may take some time for you and your students, right? We have at some point trained our students to only accept learning about and not accept figuring out. So it may be a mindset shift for your students as well, and keep that in mind. Please do not try to do all of the things that I talked about all at once. It's not possible. Okay? Go back to that piece about the mindset where I had the where are you, and work it in that order. The first thing you need to do is find regular time in your schedule to have science time. Figure that out first. And then once you figure that out, then you can move forward. Okay? Maybe you don't feel comfortable doing hands-on activities and inquiry-based activities. You're not there yet. That's okay. I would pick phenomenon, and I would have the students work with each other to make observations and talk about them. Give them opportunities to talk about stuff. It will have a very similar effect. And then when you start to feel comfortable with that, then maybe you can start adding in some different hands-on or inquiry-based activities, right? So take your time and do I don't want to say only do what you're comfortable with, but do with what you're comfortable with right now. And then when you feel like you have that under a handle, then move on to the next step. Okay? Don't go into your school year and be like, all right, we're changing all of the things. Like, that's overwhelming and it's not sustainable. You know, maybe you pick something to work on every month. You know, well, this month I'm going to work on phenomenon, and this month I'm going to work on hands-on activities. And you're going to find that some things work better towards hands-on activities, and some things have tons of phenomenon. So go with what it feels natural. And most of all, repeat this to yourself and repeat it to your students. When your students say, Miss, Mister, what's supposed to happen? You say, I don't know. We're going to find out together. Videos. So all of these are meant for educational purposes. And they're all really awesome. Okay, if you've never watched TED Ed videos, go check them out. They're awesome. Okay, for your kids specifically, the Amoeba Sisters, SciShow Kids, and Crash Course Kids are fabulous. They are literally meant for elementary school level kids. Some of the Amoeba Sisters is meant for older kids, but they definitely have stuff that can be used at the elementary level also. SciShow is meant more for adults. So it's probably going to work a little bit better for you to watch to get information. Or maybe to show pieces of it. I don't know that I would show the entire thing to the students, but you might be able to show parts of it. You know, in the high school, I can show my students SciShow things, but I think it might be a little bit above elementary school. Now, there's also a regular crash course, which is how this whole thing started. Okay, it's actually by Hank Green, and who is the brother of John Green, who wrote The Fault in Your Stars. And Crash Course was the very first one. And while there's a ton of information, they are relatively technical and speak relatively quickly. So that's the only reason why I don't recommend them. Right? If you have a decent science background, it might be okay for you. But if you're feeling uncomfortable with your science background, it's probably gonna kind of push you off. All right. And I would suggest watching Crash Course Kids, because even though it's for kids, it's totally understandable for adults. So those are videos. Web and print. So the first two, the Science Penguin and Teachers Are Terrific, they do sell activities. I'm not trying to promote them. They're paid activities. I want to make that super clear. They both have really awesome blogs that go through doing different activities and things that you can do for different subjects. And that's really what I'm promoting, is their blog. I'm not promoting their paid material. All right. NSTA is the National Science Teaching Association. They have their own press. They publish books. They also have published a number of picture books that are specifically for teaching science to elementary school that are definitely worth looking at. They also publish a list of outstanding science trade books every year. And that's absolutely worth looking at also. And then Project WET is a program that has all water-related activities, which is also really awesome. And if you're looking for something specific, and you can't find it here, you can always reach out to me and ask, because I certainly know more resources than this. So if you want to contact me, here's my contact information. Probably the best way is my email or on Instagram. Those are the places where I'm the most. You can also call me, although I am very likely to not answer and call you back, just kind of how I am. I also have a mailing list, so if you wanted to jump on that, I send hints and tricks. I don't send a lot of unnecessary mail. And I hope this was helpful for you. And I would love to hear from you. I'd love to find out what you thought about it, what resonated with you, what you wanted to know more about. So please feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you have a great summer and a great school year coming up.